The Reformed Gamers is brought to you 100% independent and ad-free thanks to our dear patrons over on patreon.com/reformedgamers to get yourself sweet, sweet perks such as uncut early access to the episodes, special episodes of the podcast, and more. Head on over to patreon.com/reformedgamers and consider lending support and joining the herd. Without further ado, let's hop into the show.
Hello and welcome, dear listeners, to episode 174 of The Reformed Gamers, the show all about theology, video games, and questioning why we're doing the things we're doing in the video games that we're playing. I'm your host, Logan.
And I'm his co-host, Adam.
And joining us for this very special episode of The Last of Us Part 2 is Matt Millsap. We're bringing him back. Matt, say hello to the dear listeners yet again.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for bringing me back. Happy to be here.
Yeah, man, we are happy to have you back. Longtime dear listeners already know Matt. They've probably listened to the episodes that he's been on before, but just in case you haven't, you can check out episodes 121 and 146, where Matt was on the show previously discussing God of War in episode 121, and he was also on episode 146 discussing What Remains of Edith Finch with Ched Spellman. So you guys can go check those out after you finish this episode, or if you want to pause this one and go listen to, hey, you do what you want. You do what you want. It's 2020. But dear listeners, we're super excited to be discussing The Last of Us Part 2. I think we'll have some very interesting takes on the game, very different takes on the game, and we'll also have a pretty good discussion surrounding the game and its themes as well. But before we get into that, a little bit of housekeeping. There is some new content on the website words are hard even at the beginning of the show. The new content on the website, in case you haven't checked it out already, our Ghost of Tsushima review is on the website, so go check that out if you have not had an opportunity to play that and you're curious what Micah thinks about the game. We also have a new retrospective up on the website on Paper Mario on the Nintendo 64, which, to be honest, I didn't know until Wesley sent the article in that Paper Mario even started on Nintendo 64. I was like, I thought he started on the GameCube. So that was a bit of a revelation for me, but you guys can go check that out on the website. Our episodes are on YouTube, finally, youtube.com/The Reformed Gamers. So if you are more of a YouTube-centric person, you can listen to the show on there as well. And you can also join our Discord server and have some fun over there. If you need help building a PC, or you're starting to stream, or you just want to talk about theology, there's a lot of channels in there. And there's a channel for pretty much every single topic that you could think of within reason. I also want to let you know
there's a lot of topics in there. Let's be real.
There's a lot of topics.
I'm overwhelmed every time I go on the Discord. I'm like, nope.
It's always fun though. It's always a good time. You also follow me on Twitch, twitch.tv/theologan. By the time that this episode goes live, there will be new trophy sub badges. So if you're a sub to the channel, your sub badges are going to look like trophies to resemble those that you would get on PlayStation, because starting in September, the channel is going to be focused on getting platinum trophies in games, getting 100%, being a completionist, and leaning into that, which will probably cause me to quit video games forever. But it'll be a fun time up until then. Also want to let you guys know that as you hang out in the channel, you get points and things like that you can use towards the Batman Arkham giveaway at the end of the month. At the end of the month, I'm giving away all of the games in the Batman Arkham series on Steam. So that means you're getting Batman Arkham Asylum, City, Origins, Night, and Arkham Origins Blackgate, which is the one that no one has heard about because it was on the Vita and hardly anyone played. But you're getting those for Steam or giving those away so you can enter to win those on the channel. Just my way of saying thank you to all the folks for supporting the channel, blowing it up. The support has been really, really good. So again, twitch.tv/thetheologan. Link will be in your show notes. And as always, if you guys like what we do here at the Reformed Gamers, if you'd like to support the show financially and get yourself some extra perks like early uncut access to the show, behind the scenes, and more, go over to patreon.com/thereformedgamers. Or if you cannot support us financially, totally understand. You can still help out the show by leaving a rating and review on your podcast app of choice. It goes a long way in helping us just kind of reach new people, reach new listeners, and gives folks an idea of what to expect when it comes to listening to The Reformed Gamers. But without further ado, let's hop into the show. We like to start the show like we always do with a little bit of what have we been playing. And Matt, you are the guest of honor, man. So tell us, what is it that you have been playing recently?
Well, a game that probably a lot of us have been playing recently, Ghost of Tsushima. So, and I'm not very far into it yet, honestly. I just began it maybe a few days ago. So I'm still in chapter or act 1. I don't know if they go by chapters or acts. I can't remember. So still, fairly early on. I haven't really upgraded myself a whole lot or learned a whole bunch of new techniques or anything like that. But from what I've played so far, it's awesome. It's a beautiful game. And, I love the setting as well. And, with the Japan and the samurai and everything. And even the open world aspect of it with, the actual landscapes themselves and the way those are rendered in game is just many times it's very, very beautiful, I would say, almost kind of like a calm and peaceful and relaxing way when you're not having to fight Mongols. You're just kind of like riding around and not running into too many of them. You can see some really beautiful landscapes. And it's just really, I've enjoyed it. It's really cool.
Right on, man. That's a game that I started playing a little bit as well, and I'm not too far into it either. Not really. I don't think I've played it enough that I can really talk about it, but I do want to know, and Adam, this will kind of lead into yours because I think you're playing it too. How long have you guys spent in photo mode?
0 minutes.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so I've taken time for that, man. I don't know what Mike is doing, man. I ain't got time to mess around with taking photos. I barely got time to play video games. I'm not going to take photos in video games.
I've taken a couple, and I'm not normally a photo mode guy either, Adam. So, that's not normally my thing to like spend a whole lot of time trying to frame the perfect photo and then edit it and stuff like that. But I have taken a few of some things that I thought were just, really cool looking so far playing the game.
I've accidentally went into photo mode a bunch of times because of where they mapped it on the D-pad. I'm like, dang it. I keep hitting it. I kept hitting it early, but at this point I've done pretty good. But I'll jump in where he jumped, because that's what I've been playing. One of the games I've been playing is Ghost of Tsushima, and man, the more I play this game, the more I fall in love with it. This game is, I thought it would be solid because Sony doesn't make crappy first-party games. But this game is so good. Like, I love what you were just saying about the game being peaceful. The game is super peaceful. The way that they do the water when you're riding your horse along the coast, the different shrines and stuff like that when you're showing them honor, the foxes across the land. The world feels relatively lived in. You're constantly coming across little towns and villages that are kind of connected. The fields are extremely beautiful. The way that they kind of bring the different colors out in different missions, like you'll have your white fields, yellow fields, there's blue flowers. Just straight off visuals are awesome. I've got to the point where there was a while in the beginning where I felt like under-level type. I didn't feel powerful. I felt like I was like, man, I'm dying more than I thought I should be. But I'm at the point now where I'm just straight wrecking people. Like, I've unlocked enough of the different stances. I can utilize them. I can switch between them pretty quickly. The combat has become smooth. Like, I can take out, I get hit, don't get me wrong, plenty. But I've built up enough, like, of the, what do they call it? It's like where you build up and it helps heal you or whatever, the resolve.
The resolve.
I've built up a decent amount of my resolve at this point. But I've just got the combat down where I'm smooth in battle now. I can switch between, I'm using all my different ghost weapons to kind of stagger people. And, I have this often, I don't know if often is the word, but sometimes with games that I'm really liking, the thought, if I'm thinking, man, I want to, I could platinum this game. I hear the platinum's not that hard. And I don't platinum anything.
Yeah.
I know I'm not going to actually do it, but it's it's one of those games that's like that good. The last game that I thought about this was like Spider-Man, where I'm like, I'm enjoying the gameplay loop so much that the temptation right now is, I wonder if I can platinum it. Now, by the time I get to the end, I'll just be ready to finish it because I'm going to, there's going to be some new shiny game that I'm going to want to play, like Tony Hawk Pro Skater or Kingdoms of Amalur here in the next little bit. But man, this game is the surprise game so far of 2020 for me. I love it. If you like Sony's third person like action games, this is an amazing game worth checking out. There's a lot to do, but it's not overwhelming. It's not like Assassin's Creed Overload where there's too many things. It feels like a proper balance. At one point I could do a lot of different things. I'm basically at the last mission of Act 1, but I've probably put, I don't know, maybe 10 to 12 hours at least into it, at least. But I'm like, okay, I want to do all the side missions before I go do the final mission because I'm afraid I won't come back to them. It is that good. So yeah, I can't speak highly enough about Ghost of Tsushima. Like, I don't know where it'll end. There's been some great games this year. I mean, Final Fantasy VII's been great. A lot of people liked Animal Crossing. I mean, we're talking about Last of Us. There's some other good games coming out this fall with Spider-Man and whatnot. But man, this game is excellent. It's a shocker to me how good this game is. I mean, yeah, it's very different than Last of Us. So if you play it right after, like, I don't know about if this is the game right after Last of Us for Matt, but the gameplay is so different. It almost takes you a second to be like, okay, I've got to think differently at this point.
Yeah, I did notice that whenever I went to this after, following The Last of Us Part 2 and everything. You're right in terms of the gameplay being totally different. It's kind of like I had to sort of reset my mind in a way.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, wait a second. Now I'm in a different world and things work a little bit differently here, control-wise and mechanics and all that. But once I got the hang of it, like you said, combat-wise, very smooth and really satisfying too.
Yeah. Well, I like how they give you a couple different ways. You can play as the ghost, you can do this stealth stuff, but they almost reward you in some ways if you do like standoffs with, like, if you're like, there's this whole thing about the code in the game. I don't want to go into it too much, but they almost want you as a samurai just to challenge them and fight them mano a mano. Don't sneak around. Don't do any of that stuff. So they kind of reward that, especially kind of as you're building up your character to do that. And so the standoffs are cool. The duels that they have you do with different missions, man, there's a lot of good to talk about. So I'm excited whenever we get to the point where we can do an episode on Ghost, because I think it'll be a good one. I mean, we all know Micah. If you're in the Facebook group, Micah he's loved it. He's already platinumed it, I'm pretty sure. But it's great. So, but the other game I've been playing is also an excellent game. So different, but that's Fall Guys. It came out on PS Plus for free on Tuesday. And man, guys, it's like Wipeout meets, I don't even know what it's basically Battle Royale Wipeout. So if you know the TV show Wipeout, where they're trying to get across all the crazy obstacles without getting knocked off the level, you're basically doing that with 60 other Teletubbies trying to get across the board. But it is so hilarious because you're doing your best, but all of a sudden your character gets hit by like 3 or 4 of these balls kind of coming down this ramp. And it's just, you can't do nothing but laugh. It's so funny. It's an endearing game. It's a good level of competition, but you don't care really if you lose because it's probably really funny how you're dying. But I played it with Micah and a couple guys the other night, and we're just cracking up. I mean, it's just so chill. A lot of people are comparing it to Rocket League just with how it came to PS Plus first free, like on its launch. Now, I don't know if it'll have the longevity of a Rocket League, but I cannot, and this will be my reco for the end of the show, but I cannot recommend it enough. I mean, if you've got a wife or kids that like you're looking for a game to play with them, like I had Hannah pick up the sticks the other day, and she don't pick up the PlayStation controller too often, and she qualified her first event through. Oh, wow. I think she qualified her first 2 events, and then she got wrecked on the third one. But she was figuring it out. It's simple. There's you move. There's a camera. So your left joystick controls your character. The right one controls the camera. Then you've got jump, dive, and grab. And so it's super simple and it's pretty straightforward. You're just trying to make it usually from one place to the other, but there's some other mini game types in there. But it is, man, it's just so much pure fun. And then I screwed up. I need to post the video on Facebook, but I've won one game, so I felt pretty good about that. And I'm like, I'm going to play another one just to see if I can go back to back. And it's such a shame. I should have won. I literally, the last round was you have to make it through this like level and you've got to jump and grab this crown. Well, I thought you just had to hit it because all the other things you just have to cross the finish line. So I'm like cruising, I'm crushing everybody. And I go to hit the crown. I didn't realize that you have to grab it. So you just see my character run up this hill. I jump and I hit the crown and he just falls down this ramp and I lose because I didn't hit the grab button. I like lost my mind. I took video. I saved the clip. I sent it to Mike. I'm like, what the heck? He's like, well, did you grab it? I'm like, no. He's like, oh, you have to grab it. I'm like, what? Like, I would have back-to-back wins, but freaking noobed. And so, but it's so much fun. You guys got to check it out. It's worth the free download, no doubt about that. And so, hopefully I'm going to jump on for a few games after we record, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I had seen people play that game on Twitch this past week, and it looked like a ton of fun. So much fun that I even went ahead and bought it on PC because I know there's going to be some people that.
Okay, Mr. Moneybags.
I'm just saying, what?
I get it for free, and I'm still going to pay for it.
You know, when you're Twitch famous like the Theologian.
I tell you what.
I'm kidding. I'm not Twitch famous. But no, I went ahead and picked it up there because I know there's going to be some people that I'm going to play with on PC as well. And it looks fun, man. I want to support those developers and kind of help them out that way because it looks like a really, really good time. But that's not one of the games that I've been playing, unfortunately. I'm realizing here recently in the past few weeks, I have had very little time to game, and so my gaming experiences have been a little more bite-sized in terms of content. But the two games that have been helping me out there, the first one I'll talk about is Destiny 2, getting back into that and playing that and getting ready for the new expansion Beyond Light and just kind of getting a feel for really what's going on in the world. It's cool to see how Bungie is setting things up for the next expansion with these like dark pyramid ship things coming into the world, and you'll see them fly by in the skyboxes from time to time, and it really feels like there's this invasion coming into the game, and so it should it's setting the stage for what I hope to be a pretty cool event in the expansions, and hopefully we'll see kind of what they're going to do and how they're going to cycle in some of the older content so we can relive Vault of Glass and some of the earlier raids and things like that. But I played the other night with a friend of the show, Clay Hargrave, the one of the makers of Godspeed. Got to play that with his clan, got to go through a raid, and they were so surprised at how well I managed to get the mechanics down of the raid. They were like, yeah, you need to come with us more often because you did surprisingly well for someone that we don't know and all that. And so, but it was a good time. It was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed it. And it's that thing. I said this before, man. It's that thing of like you come away from that game for a little bit and then you get back into it and you're like, oh yeah, this is why I like the game. This game is a lot of fun when you really get into it. And so I think the fact that it is free to play now as well kind of makes it more accessible for folks. So if any of you dear listeners are getting into Destiny 2, whether you're on PS4 or PC, let me know and we'll see if we can run some Gambit together or I don't know, get into some hijinks on a few other different game types. But yeah, I'm enjoying it. I'm really excited for the expansion coming out. I think it's November now is what they pushed it to. So that gives me more time to knock out some in-game achievements. But I've been playing that, and the other game I've been playing pretty consistently has been Animal Crossing New Horizons, which I thought I'd be done with that game for now. Or I thought I'd be done with it at the beginning of summer, but they keep putting in new content. Like they have fireworks shows in there now every Sunday night that you can put your own custom designs in. So I've had like a Reggie firework thing shoot off, and then one of PewDiePie's like bro fist thing, and then a Pikachu show up. Like it's cool how you can customize the fireworks and really kind of make it your own unique show. And I love the underwater kind of stuff that they do, or how you can swim now, you can dive underwater, get the mollusks or whatever you want to get. I had a cool thing happen recently since it was my birthday. Played the game on that, and the villagers threw basically a birthday party in game for me and gave a bunch of items out, and I was like, this is cool. This is like a game that keeps on giving. And so it's just a good time. It's just a relaxing game. It's one I can play for like 10 to 15 minutes and feel like I've done something and just really enjoy it. And it just, yeah, it's very different than the game that we'll be talking about a little bit later on in a lot of ways. But before we can get to that, let's go ahead and swap gears and talk about what have we been reading. Matt, what's something that you have been reading lately?
Yeah, so some of you may have seen, if you follow like news for seminaries, things like that, we have a new colleague at Midwestern Seminary, Patrick Schreiner. And so he had a new book that came out recently called The Ascension of Christ. And he didn't ask me to plug this or anything like that, so no worries there. This is just me wanting to read this on my own. And but yeah, he had a new book coming out called The Ascension of Christ. And it's a short, pretty accessible book that's written for just about anyone on the ascension of Christ, and in terms of it being a neglected doctrine, essentially, is his overall argument that he's making there. A lot of times he says, we think of Christ's ascension as something that just happens after Christ is resurrected from the dead, right? Like the main event, if you will, is when Christ is resurrected, and then the ascension is just like, oh yeah, okay, now he ascends to heaven and is seated at the right hand of the Father. But instead, according to the argument that he makes in the book, the ascension should actually be seen as something that's far more important than just, like a footnote to the resurrection. And so, you typically think of the rubric that's used most often to describe Christ's mission here on earth when he was here, as Christ fulfilling the role of prophet, priest, and king. And so he kind of takes that rubric and then also applies that specifically to Christ's ascension, and explains how the ascension of Christ is more or less the culmination of each one of those three roles that Christ occupied: the role of prophet, priest, and king. So highly recommend it to everyone to read. I mean, it's not, a lot of times theology can be kind of scary, right? In terms of, just everyday Christian, everyday believer who's like, oh, I'm looking for a book to read, and I don't want to get into really heavy theology that's really technical that I'm not going to be able to understand or anything like that. This is not that. This is something that's intended to be accessible to just about anyone who wants to pick it up and learn more about Christ's ascension and its importance. So highly recommend it. It's been great.
Nice.
Right on. Adam, what about you?
Yeah, so just reading a couple different things. So our lead pastor is going, we're not calling it a sabbatical, but it's in some ways a sabbatical. He's taken 3 months just off. It's not for vision casting. It's, hey, you've been church planning basically for 20 years, and we're now an established church, and we're about to gear up for the next 20 years of ministry. So let's give you 3 months off just so you can rest, spend time with your family. So I'm getting the opportunity to preach a lot more now. So I'm preaching basically, we have our missions conference coming up this weekend, but I preached last weekend, preaching the next 3 weekends after that. So just in some of the studies, we're preaching through the book of 1 John. And so I was just reading on, I got to preach on abiding in Christ. So of course I went to Andrew Murray for some abiding in Christ goodness, because that's, I mean, if you've ever read Andrew Murray's Abiding in Christ, kind of, I guess it's considered a devotional. It's just so rich. But the thought that I kept kind of dwelling on as I was reading it, and as I was preparing to preach on it, he talks about how we first heard the compassionate call to come for salvation, where Christ says, come to me, but we didn't always hear that same call to come and stay with me. He bids us to come and stay, but instead we chose to come and go. And so just really thinking about that as I was, preaching to our people this last weekend on, many of us, we fall away, we get discouraged, we get disappointed. And it's not because Christ went anywhere. It's not because he's let us down. It's because we've stopped abiding. We've wandered off. We've gone astray. We've got caught up with other things. And so instead of coming and staying with Christ, we've decided to wander on to other things. And we come to Christ for momentary reprieve. Maybe life's hard. I'm going to come to Christ, and we sense the goodness, but then we get caught up in so many other things, and we wander off, and then we wonder why we get so tired again. We get so discouraged. But God talking about how, and so I also went to John 15, because how do you preach on abiding in Christ without talking about the vine and the branches? So we went there and talked about it, and it was just good. So yeah, really just talking, really even for myself, abiding in Christ, not trying to do the different things every day, but really trying to, what does it mean for me to abide today? So yeah, it's good. I mean, if you've never read Andrew Murray, his Abiding in Christ, my buddy from Cedarville, Taylor, I think he basically just starts it over every time he reads it. He'll read it and he just starts it over. It's like how I watch The Office. As soon as it's over, I start it right back again. I think he treats this book like that. It's got a lot of rich theology that we need. So
that's awesome.
That's kind of what I've been reading.
That's awesome. We'll round this section out. I'll kind of talk a little bit about what I've been reading. As we're getting ready to start youth back up, I want to talk about things with my students that I think are relevant to them, and things that are topics that they'll get a lot out of, and hopefully answer some of the questions that they have. And so what I'm doing this semester is I'm gearing up a series of lessons that will directly be inspired by some Jonathan Steingard's post back in May when he came out. In case you guys don't know, he was the lead singer of Hawk Nelson, and he came out and said he doesn't believe in God anymore. And in his post on Instagram, he listed several questions that he had about Christianity, the Bible, God. And so I'm taking those and using those as a blueprint and basically answering each of those questions in a couple of different lessons. And so I'm tackling the question of, if God is all loving and all powerful, why is there evil in the world? Which is a totally light subject to start the series off with. But I've been studying that recently, and I've been using, so far I've been using Norman Geisler's If God, Why Evil book. And so a few chapters into the book now, and he's kind of breaking down, he first started off with the origin of evil, the persistence of evil, kind of like how it persists throughout time. And so he's just taking these things step by step. But one of the things that he talks about is, in order for us to really understand evil, we have to have a standard of good. We can't just say that something is evil without knowing what is good. We can't know what is sinful without knowing what is holy. And so it was really cool to see how he expressed that in the opening chapters of the book, and that, the only way that we can really understand or even come to know what is evil is we first have to know what is good. And then once we know what is good, we have to ask, okay, well, how do we know what is good? Where does that standard come from? And so he brings it back to Scripture, and I think he does a pretty good job of setting things up. It's definitely, I think the book so far is a pretty accessible read, but it's one that I'm glad I'm taking it a little more slowly, because I feel like if I tried to run through it, I would just trip and fall, and then my brain would just kind of be very jumbled. But it's good, and I'm hoping that these series of talks are helpful for my students, and even the one whether they're a Christian or not. I hope it's helpful in one way where maybe it answers the skeptic and kind of takes down some of their arguments, or maybe for the Christian who wants to share their faith but they don't know how to answer these questions. I hope it equips them to maybe have some answers for their friends or people that they come into contact with. And so it's been also good for me, just because that's something that I've been kind of even asking myself lately in light of this whole COVID thing. It's like, why is all this stuff going on? Why hasn't God just taken it away? And so that, in combination with reading through Psalms and how David is just being open and honest with God, and going, how long, God, how long will you go without doing so and so? So it's been good for me. It's been it's cool to have that where as I'm studying to teach students something, I'm also growing as well and learning it and getting to kind of live that out. So it's been good. It's been real good. But that being said, it's kind of a good segue into the topic of the show here, because we're going to be dealing with themes of good and evil and cycles of violence and things of that nature that'll deal with that indirectly or even directly. But before we get into discussing The Last of Us Part 2, dear listeners, just a quick reminder to rate and review the show on your podcast app of choice, whether that's iTunes, Downcast, whatever it may be. Head on over there and leave us a rating and review. Now, in what is probably easily the most divisive game of 2020, Naughty Dog's continuation of The Last of Us Part 2 sees Ellie on a quest for revenge, a game that seeks to ask you how far will you go and will force you to ask yourself if it's worth it in the end. This dark tale is definitely not for the faint of heart. But as we do at TRG, it's time to bring the Christian worldview to bear on the game. Dear listeners, just to let you know, in case you haven't played the game, we will give you plenty of spoiler warning before we get into the game's themes and story, so as you don't spoil it for yourself. But I have a feeling that if you are listening to this, you probably played the game and you really, really want to dig deeper into the game or just continue hearing more about it. So that is what we will do.
Hello there, dear listeners. Yes, it's me, Dear Editor Supreme, with another episode of Dear Ear Protective Services. If you're hearing this, you know something has gone terribly awry. In this case, Logan. The first rule of giving a spoiler-free synopsis or a spoiler-free review is to not include spoilers. Apparently, this was lost on Logan, as he indicated that early on in the game, a certain character meets a certain fate. Not everyone knows this. In fact, the Dear Editor didn't know this until then, so thanks a lot, Logan. I guess this game's ruined for me, too. Anyway, we just wanted to give you a heads up. It's going to be spoiled within the first 5 seconds, so if you have not played the game yet, what are you waiting for? Go play it. If you weren't going to play the game, then don't play it. Personally, I don't know yet. Jury's still out. Anyway, without further ado, let's get back into the show.
And really, just the story synopsis of this game kind of gave it to you already. It starts off with, the game starts off with quite a bang, so to speak. You come across Joel being murdered by this strange group that you've never seen before. And so Ellie sets out on a quest for revenge, really. And along the way, you kind of start seeing that maybe Ellie and Joel's murderer are not that different after all. And maybe what is evil depends on your point of view. It's kind of all I'll say for that there, and hopefully that will intrigue you enough to continue listening to the episode.
Potential spoilers right there. I mean,
just saying.
I mean, you said you were going to give him a spoiler warning, and all of a sudden you jump right on into it, saying Joel gets killed. I mean,
we all knew it. It's.
I guess
we all knew it. If you don't know that by now, you do now. You do now.
Wowzers.
I'm going to be honest. As far as development highlights, I don't have any. I was too busy and didn't look them up. So if you guys want to look those up, wikipedia.com.
There's plenty to talk about with the game that we ain't got to worry about the developmental stuff this time.
Yeah, that's true. So as far as, it's kind of ironic now, spoiler-free review impressions, guys. What do you think?
Oh, my goodness.
What, spoiler-free? What?
Oh, my goodness.
This is for the person who is listening right now and is like, who's Joel? So if that's you.
What's The Last of Us?
It's his little brother.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness, Logan. You're killing me.
That's what I do. Anyway, Matt, man, what'd you think?
Yeah, so it's a ride, that's for sure. And it's an experience that is, I mean, I would definitely classify it as being difficult. And I don't mean difficult in the sense like it's a difficult game in challenging in terms of, it's easy to get killed or the enemies are really strong or whatever. I don't mean it like that. I mean difficult in the sense of it's just difficult to experience and to, I don't want to say suffer through, but it's not a happy game, right? It's not, I wouldn't call it fun in playing a video game in the traditional sense of the word fun, right? It's not like, okay, I'm doing this to chill and to lay back and just have some good natured fun or whatever. It's not going to be fun in that respect. Instead, it's more of challenging in the sense of the content that's there and the story that's being told and what the creators are trying to do. So, I would say that if you want to go spoiler free, if you want to call it that or whatever, I would just say that at the outset. It's probably not going to be for everyone just simply on that basis. So Super Mario Odyssey, it is not that kind of thing, if that makes sense. You know what you're getting, and you know what type of experience you're wanting to get. Say when you play the latest Super Mario game, this is not going to be that for those who haven't played it. But again, if you're listening, I'm sure that you probably have. But that's the best way I could draw kind of like that dichotomy in terms of what type of game it is. It's meant to be taken more seriously in the sense that you would say go to the movie theater and watch a serious drama versus going to the movie theater and watching a summer blockbuster action flick.
Yeah, and that's where I'll jump in. That's kind of what I was, as I was listening to you talk, Matt. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie Silence. It's a movie about basically the persecuted Christians in Japan. It's got whatever Kylo Ren's character is and the old Spider-Man, the one in between Tobey Maguire and the most recent guy. See how good I am with my movie references. But that movie is super serious, but it makes you think. I wouldn't describe watching that movie as fun at all, but it's art. It gets you thinking. You kind of, there's a level of where my wife would say she did not enjoy it all because I think she got nightmares from it. But you kind of, when you're done watching, you're kind of thankful that you did because it gets you thinking about some things maybe you don't necessarily always think about. So that's kind of how I think in some ways about Last of Us. Now, it's a video game, so I definitely probably engage and enjoy it more than I do some of those type of movies. But in the end, as you're doing certain things in the game, you're like, I don't think I would normally do this. I don't think I would normally take this action in games, but they're wanting you to feel some different things. I was listening to some podcasts today in preparation for it, and especially with the scene that Logan already spoiled, they said we want to find the line and we want to go just a little bit past it so it really makes you feel. And so they were really trying to draw out some of these emotions. We'll get into more of that when we get into some of the spoilers, but some of the choices that they make throughout the game, you're like wow, and you don't even really, I think until I finished it, honestly, as I was playing through the game, I'm like, if I'm being honest, I probably like the first one better than this one. But this one, the way they did storytelling in this one was genius. I think the storytelling was better in this one, but I just enjoyed the story of the first one better. But the way that they kind of flip everything on you, and at different times you're playing as a character and you're like, I can't believe they're making me play as this character right now. Like, you almost don't, like, as I've listened to other people, I didn't want to take certain actions. Like, I literally would just die because I'm not going to do it. I just want to see what happens. Does anything crazy happen if I don't take action? Well, my character just died every time I did that. But I didn't want to do things because I'm like, I want to play the other character. I don't want to take these steps. And so I'm really glad I played it. I'm glad I finished it. I don't know, maybe one day I'll go back to it. I'm definitely not, again, going to platinum it or anything, but it's definitely, storytelling at its finest, in a video game art form. No one does it better than Naughty Dog. I was listening to someone talk about like Ghost of Tsushima. After you play Last of Us Part 2 and you see the way that they do cutscenes and you play a game like Ghost of Tsushima, the game feels so stiff. The acting in Ghost, and it's not like, it's still really good, but it's very much, they show one character talking, they show the other character talking, and there's not like it's not like a legit like cutscene almost. It's just like dialogue. Last of Us is a cutscene. It's like watching, it's art. You're watching this like video game movie at times, and it's powerful. They bring out a lot of good emotions, and there's a lot to talk about as we get into the spoiler stuff.
No, I agree with you what you said about on the on the storytelling side and everything, I would say if you take The Last of Us Part 1 and Part 2 together as one experience, that is probably at this point the pinnacle of video game storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by video game storytelling, I mean something very specific here. I mean a story that can only be told in video game form. Because what they do in terms of building the empathy that you have for the characters that you're controlling, both in The Last of Us Part 1 and The Last of Us Part 2, is something that can't really be done in books or television shows or movies, because those are so passive. Mm-hmm. And you're just basically, you can kind of vicariously live as some of the characters that you're reading about or that you're seeing on the screen in those various media, but you're not actually in control of what they're doing. You don't really have a stake in what's happening, if that makes sense.
Yep.
But The Last of Us and The Last of Us Part 2 sort of force you to care about these characters in ways that I'm not sure it's possible to do so in other media. And so with the way that they do that, and the way that Naughty Dog has constructed this overall experience, putting the two together, I think is just a really, really great example. And like I said, probably the pinnacle of what video game storytelling actually is and what it intends to do.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. It's good.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
No, you're good. I think what you said is exactly right. I think because you're playing as the characters, it does change things. And hearing you talk about that, it makes total sense. And so I think you're exactly right. That's good. It's a good point.
And it's at this point, after I've spoiled the game for people and have admittedly only played 8 hours of the game, I'm wondering, why am I even on this episode?
Hey, you're driving the ship, man. We're just giving you we're calling out the fish.
There you go. I don't understand that reference, but I'll go with it. You say you're calling out the fish?
I don't know. If you're driving the boat, we're saying, hey, there's something pretty over there.
Oh, okay. Never mind. Now I get it. Anyway, yeah, for me, playing this game, the whole 8 hours that I put into it, was a lot like eating spicy chips. There's moments where I'm like enjoying it. I'm having fun. It's like, it's thrilling. And there's moments where I'm like, I don't know if I like that much.
It's a great analogy.
Do I like this? Well, let me try another chip and see. Okay, we're on the ride again. Here we go. There's some cool stuff happening. I'm liking the heat. That aftertaste, though, I don't know how I feel. And it was just that constant cycle of it again and again and again, to where I just finally just kind of sat there. Once I reached the 8 hour mark and reached Seattle day 2, for those of you that have played the game, I was like, I don't know if I want to keep eating these chips anymore, you know? And so I admittedly put the game down, and that was 3 weeks ago. I haven't picked it up since, and I don't know if it's something I want to keep playing, to be honest with you, because we'll get into some of that a little bit later. But I definitely don't want to. I don't want to make the game. Here's the thing, because we've seen this online. I don't want to sit here and say the game is a 0 or whatever like that, because it's not. On a technical level, I don't know how they accomplished some of the stuff that they did in this game, because playing on PC has given me a new perspective on graphics and all that stuff. But like the stuff that Naughty Dog manages to pull off in this game, I seriously don't know how they did it. The facial animations in this game are on a whole other level. Like they make Mass Effect Andromeda look like crayon painting things. Like it is insane at the level of detail that is in this game. And I should have known that going in, because it's Naughty Dog, but I just found myself not really. There's parts I did enjoy, but then there's also parts that I'm like, I don't want to have to go through this section just to get to the parts that I want to play. And we'll get into that a little bit later on. So it's a mix.
I think you might one day come back around to it. It may not be soon, but I think there's a time and place where Logan finishes Last of Us Part 2. I believe it.
But the real question is, do I platinum it? Yeah, that's the real question. Probably
should
not.
anyone platinum any game is my question, but
Absolutely, they should. Absolutely. But we're not going to talk about platinum trophies. All right, guys, enough of we're going to get into, we've already gotten to spoilers, but if you
this is when I would drop a gif of like, eek.
That was a very poor choice of words on my part. Look, if you got through the first spoiler thing and you're still here and you don't want any more of it spoiled, spoiler warning here. Just going to throw that out there. You got some time left. Spoilers stuff.
We'll call these the specific story beat spoilers.
Yeah. Story beat spoilers. There we go. Apart from the one I already gave. Anyway, so, okay, let's get into it. Now, this is the part where I would normally bring in some listener write-ins to kind of coincide with that, maybe use as segues into some of these topics. But, yeah, nobody wrote in on this one, so I don't know. I mean,
here's where I want to start. Let me jump in here, Logan. I want to start with the question I got at the top because it ties into the first one. So even you can get engaged in this one. So going into part 2, how did you guys feel about Joel? Because, after I played the first one, I very much felt like I'm down with the decision that Joel made. Like, he's protecting his person. They've gone on this journey. He just can't come to grips with Ellie dying. Again, it's a video game, so running around killing people, you don't really think anything about it. And so going into it, I'm kind of thinking, of course he's going to save Ellie and kind of ride off in the sunset. But man, after you play part 2, it really gets you thinking differently. Where were you guys at in regards to that? And we can get into more to kind of how we think about him after playing the second one, or even part of it for Logan. But like, where were you guys at going into the second one? What were your thoughts on how the first one ended, specifically about Joel?
Matt, I'll let you go first on that.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I've gone back and forth a lot on it personally. So let me just back up a little bit. Objectively speaking, in terms of what Joel did, right? When you look at it from an overall moral perspective here, what he did, objectively speaking, is morally wrong, I believe, in the sense of he dooms humanity and also contravenes the will of the person that he is rescuing and convinces himself that he's trying to save her because that's what she would want him to do, and he doesn't want her to die and she doesn't want to die. But at the same time, sort of almost lying to himself, I think, at the same time of he lies to himself in the sense that he knows, and even Marlene calls him out on it, if you remember, that he knows that Ellie would have wanted to sacrifice herself if it meant saving all of mankind. Yet he still chooses to save her nonetheless and thus doom mankind, presumably, as a result, because now there's no cure that's going to be developed. So it was a selfish act in that sense. And so from that objectively moral aspect, I believe that to have been wrong. But at the same time, I thought to myself, if I put myself in those shoes and that was, say, my daughter, and, it's easy for me to be objective and take the righteous route, right? And say, oh yeah, I totally would have sacrificed my daughter for the sake of all of mankind. But to actually be in that moment and in his shoes when he makes that decision, I'm not so sure that I wouldn't have made the same decision that he did in terms of choosing, okay, this is my daughter, even though she's, Ellie's not technically Joel's daughter, of course, but she effectively becomes his daughter. I mean, if I was in his shoes, I very well could have made that exact same choice as well. So it's in that respect, on the personal level, it's maybe a little bit more difficult for me to condemn Joel's choice there at the end of The Last of Us Part 1, even though I know that objectively speaking, morally, it was the wrong choice to make because he's sacrificing the many for the sake of the one, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I'll just quickly add in that because I was thinking like, wait, I think we did an episode on the first Last of Us, and we did. It's episode 71. And I don't know if I mentioned this on there, but like when I got to the end of the game, I was like, it's kind of the same thing as Matt. Like, I don't know that he necessarily did the right thing, but if I was a dad, I don't like that's where the conflict lies. It's like, I don't know if I'd be comfortable giving up my kids, so to speak, for this particular thing, because that's a really difficult decision to make. But at the same time, you kind of have to wonder, like you kind of, it makes you think. And that was kind of the cool thing about the first game. Not saying the second game doesn't do this, but the first game made you think, about about the ramifications of what he just did. Like when you stop and really think about what he just did, he essentially doomed humanity. And that starts coming out in part 2. You start seeing it and hearing it more. And you kind of hear it from Ellie too, when she talks about how she's struggling with this idea or this reality of like how she feels like her life doesn't really mean anything now, because she wasn't able to die for this cure to potentially save people. And so you see that come out, and it really just makes you wonder, did he really do the right thing? And I'm going to be honest, when I got to the end of the first game, I'm like, I don't really know if I'd call him a hero. I don't know if I'd necessarily call him a good guy, but I will call him an authentic guy. Like, this is, what do you do in that situation? Is it a good one? Is it a good decision? I don't think so. But at the same time, I kind of feel the struggle there. I don't know what I would do necessarily.
Yeah. And that's really where Logan, and again, just as you play more of the game, you talk about, you can think of hypothetical ramifications of the choice he makes, but as you play the second one, it's no longer hypotheticals, because they literally have you playing as Abby, whose life was destroyed because of Joel's decision. And so the way that they do that storytelling was genius, because early on you don't really know who Abby is, and then you get to the point where she kills Joel and you think, okay, I'm probably done with that character. But then after you play as Ellie and they go all the way back to Seattle Day 1, and you have to play as Ellie or Abby again, and you play as her for probably maybe even more time than you do as Ellie in the game, they make you begin to feel sorry for her, and that's why I put the question, was he the hero? And to Joel, he probably in some ways was a hero, even though, I think this is a point where you could bring in, he tells Ellie, I don't know if you made it to the cutscene where they're interacting outside the hospital. You probably didn't make it that far, Logan, but he's basically like, I would do it all over again. Like, I wouldn't change it. And it's like, so you see that, and she's like, I don't know if I can basically forgive you for this. But he's like, it doesn't really matter. I wouldn't change it, because that's how much he cares for her. I think that's that fatherly side, that human side that comes out where, yeah, in my mind, I can say, yeah, sure, I would. It makes sense to save everybody else, but there ain't no doubt once you get into that and you start, I think, again, these are natural, like, gut reactions in some ways. You don't really have time to sit there and weigh out your pros and cons as they're about to kill this person you love. You got to make a gut reaction, and a lot of times that's going to be an emotional one. Like, I was talking with someone the other day about the way sin works. We get so deep into sin sometimes, and we look around and we say, well, how in the world did I just get here? Well, we start getting ourselves in emotional binds, and our emotions take over, that we just start acting emotionally and not actually thinking about what is happening around us. Like, I'm sure if Joel had the time to think about, okay, what are the ramifications of what I'm about to do? He might have thought differently, but he didn't. You don't have that time in this game. It's bang, 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 bang. As soon as you're into, I guess it's Seattle or wherever the first one ends, as soon as you get there, they're automatically like taking her to the surgery, so it's like bam, bam, bam. And the way that they do the storytelling with Abby is just, it's genius. Like, by the end of the game, you almost begin to feel more for Abby than you do for Ellie, because she has lost, Ellie has lost a lot. She lost Joel, she's lost some friends, but I'm like, Abby has lost everyone. Like, anybody that's close to Abby in this game basically dies except for Lev at the end of the game. And they really make you feel for her. And I'm like, she lost her dad. Joel went through everything to protect this, kind of functioning type daughter, but he's the bad guy because he took away multiple people's family members, multiple people's dads. And so the way they kind of flip your emotions on top of yourself is nuts. It's nuts.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Adam, especially with the having to play as Abby, or them making you play as Abby, as being an ingenious plot device, but also in the sense that that's really sort of the hinge point of the game. Mm-hmm. If they can't get you to care about Abby, if they can't get you to empathize with her in some respect, then the game doesn't work, right? Mm-hmm. You have to care what happened to Abby. And so, like, with the way that they structured that, I thought was very well done, because near the beginning, of course, you have Abby killing Joel, which is an extremely gut-wrenching and, hard to watch, disturbing moment. And you as a player, having previously gone through and experienced everything that Joel and Ellie experienced together in the first game, and especially, for him to be killed right in front of Ellie, you have sort of like a visceral reaction to that, or at least I did, right? My first initial response and visceral reaction to that was similar to what I would expect, was Ellie's if she were a real person and that was a real story, which was, you just killed this person who I love, and in this case, Ellie's father figure, and now I want to hurt you, right? And so at the purely visceral sort of, emotional and even sinful and fleshly response to an instance like that, that would probably be what would initially arise in my heart if I was being honest, right? Now, of course, being someone who's been sanctified, or is progressively being sanctified by Christ, right, and has been saved, I know that that's the wrong reaction to have, right? I shouldn't be seeking out revenge in that instance. But I have to be honest with myself and admit, on the basis of me being a sinner, that my initial gut reaction, if that were to happen to me, if I were to put myself into Ellie's shoes, would be like, yeah, I want to go and hurt this girl, because there's no context there. Ellie has no idea who these people are, other than the fact that they just wanted to hunt down Joel and kill them. And so she has no idea or understanding of what their reasoning is or what their motivations are. And her gut reaction is to seek revenge at that point. So when you take that and they frame the story in that respect, and then they have you playing as Ellie in the lead up to that to try to track down Abby, and Ellie is systematically making her way through Abby's friends, or the other people who were there, and killing them. Sometimes, in some instances, a little bit more brutally than others. Some of them were, you could argue, might have been matters of necessity, in that they tried to kill her in self-defense, knowing that she was going to try to kill them. There may be a little bit of gray area there, but more or less, like you were describing, she systematically makes her way through Abby's people, if you will, or Abby's circle, and kills all of them, leading up to the point to where you have the confrontation in the theater, which, there's a very important moment there when Abby is pointing the gun at Ellie, and she tells her, "We let you both live, and you wasted it." And so in Abby's mind, right, she's the righteous one here. And it's like, I could have killed you. I could have killed Tommy, but I didn't.
Yeah.
And then you've wasted the chance that I gave you, because instead of going ahead and living your life from that point, you've gone after me and you've killed all of my friends as a result. And so it's like, more or less a wasted life. And at that moment, that, if you remember, that's when that cutscene drops out, and you immediately jump into a flashback of Abby's when she was with her dad, right around the time that Ellie and Joel were found, there near the hospital and everything. And it goes from that moment, if you remember too, to the hallway of the hospital, with the alarms blaring and everything. And as soon as I gained control of Abby in that hallway, I knew it was coming and I knew what they were doing. And I was like, oh man, this is wow. Because you walk as Abby down that hallway, and you walk into the room where Joel has just, I guess, murdered, if you want to, really that's what it was, right? Murdered her father, and taken Ellie off the operating table and everything. And you experience what that would be like for a daughter to walk in on that situation, realizing that her father had just been murdered murdered by someone rather, when he was about to, try to save mankind with the cure and everything. And at that point, I hadn't really earned that empathy for Abby that they were going for yet.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew that that's the direction that they were wanting to go from that point. And I was like, okay, I'm on board with this, right? I want to see where this goes in terms of Abby's story and see if they can actually make me care about her rather than seeing her as the villain who really starts things off in the story.
Yeah. And really, I mean, with Abby, she seeks not necessarily redemption for herself, but she seeks to live in many ways a changed life after she kills Joel. You see, I've done this thing, but it didn't really give me the fulfillment that I was looking for. And so as she's progressing through the game, you see her making choices that the old Abby probably wouldn't have made pre-killing Joel. She goes up against Isaac, the leader of their group. She's helping Lev, and I can't remember the
Yara.
Yeah.
So
she helps them and goes to their island during that whole scene. So for her, it's much more, I'm trying to make penance so much for the big choice that I just made, for taking this that didn't give me fulfillment. So I'm going to try to almost live differently. And that's where I think, again, you mentioned it with, you wasted it. You feel like Abby in some ways is trying to not waste the rest of her life. Like it almost feels like she wasted so much time hunting down this thing to give her satisfaction that didn't give satisfaction. But she's like, and then for Ellie, so she's like, we could have just been done with this, but you've wasted all of that when you could have been she's not necessarily saying that she was doing the right thing, but it almost like I was trying to do right, even by not even killing you and by now helping with Lev and Yara, and you wasted all of it. You've wasted it all. And so they do. I think that hinge point that you're talking about is exactly right. By the time you get to that towards the end of the game, you've not only just grown empathy, but you're like, you have so much affection for Ellie after the first one, but they build up so much affection for Abby in the second one. You're like, I don't know what and that kind of hinted at where when you get in the theater at the end of the game, I think my wife was sitting by me as I was playing that point. I'm like, I verbalized, I can't believe they're making me play as Abby right now. I thought that was going to be the end of it. You've got this fight between Ellie and Abby going on, and I'm like, I can't believe I'm not Ellie right now. Like, that was one of those points where I'm like, I don't really want to continue because I feel like I should be playing as Ellie. Like, everything in my natural instinct says I should be playing as Ellie. And then you get to the final scene, and we'll get into more of that probably later. But then you're playing as Ellie, and you're almost like, okay, I wish I was playing as Abby. It's like they play with you so much in that way, but it's good. It's good.
So with that tension there, that push and that pull, man, what do you think that says about the idea of good and evil? Like, when it comes to this and how you see really both sides of the coin, so to speak. I mean, how do you go about determining who is right and who is wrong in this scenario?
It's a great question. I mean, I think from the developer's standpoint, part of the point that they're trying to make, part of, I guess, what you would say is their worldview, which is not obviously explicitly Christian, is that there really is no right or wrong from their perspective, right? In saying that Abby was neither right nor wrong, nor was Ellie, which we as believers would ultimately have to reject, because we would go all the way to the outset in terms of the initiating act, where Abby seeks revenge on Joel for killing her father, as being unrighteous, right? Because according to Scripture, revenge is unrighteous. We're not to take that into our own hands and to try to enact vengeance on others for the wrongs that they've committed against us. And so Abby is essentially guilty of that, but then also Ellie is essentially guilty of that as well. And so within the overall sort of construct of what the developers are intending to convey with that, in relation to, say, like, the cycle of violence between all of those acts, with Joel being the one who starts it, right, with killing Abby's father, and then this cycle of violence that seems to continue, at some point, somebody's got to give it up, right? At some point, somebody has to reach a point to where they're like, okay, I'm not going to do this anymore. And what's really interesting is that, ironically, you as the player are expecting, because you've had the experience with Ellie in the first game leading up to this, and you've already built up all those hours of empathy with her. So the natural tendency is to think, okay, well, Ellie is going to be the one to step up. Ellie's going to be the one to step up and say, no, enough is enough. This is the end. And ironically, she's the one throughout the game up until the very last point of the game, which, like Adam said, we'll talk about that later. But throughout the game, Ellie is the one who more or less keeps that cycle going. She's the one who can't let go. She's the one who is, essentially bent on vengeance. And so it's interesting that Abby is the more, if you want to look at it this way, kind of like the more righteous of the two, in the sense that she was willing to walk away, right? She was willing to say, okay, I'm done with this. This is over. Whereas Ellie was not. And I think that that's an intentional subversion of their part of the player's expectations in terms of who was right versus who was wrong, because they're forcing you to do these things as Ellie that I think their intent is that you shouldn't want to do. Now, admittedly, maybe there were some players out there who are like, oh yeah, I want Abby to die no matter what. I hate her or whatever. Sure, probably some players out there who felt that, but I don't think that's what the developer's intent was. I think they were wanting you to feel uncomfortable through all of the Ellie sequences with what you are doing as Ellie, and wanted you to internally be saying, no, I don't want to do this. Ellie, don't do this. I don't want to have to play through this. I don't want to have to control this.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, even as you talk about there, those uncomfortable moments. I mean, we keep kind of bouncing around that last scene, but you get to this point where Abby is hanging from this pole with Lev and all these other people, because you get to this camp that's like, you think you've met bad camps, and then you get to this camp and they're like the worst of the worst. Like the last hour to 2 hours of the game, I mean, you almost can't believe what you're playing. Like it's some really intense stuff, and you've already gone through a lot of intense stuff, but they almost create a newfound, like in 30 minutes, a newfound hatred for this group. You don't like anyone. You hate them because you play as Ellie. You hate them because you play as Abby. You just hate this group because of what they've done. And you get to this point where you think Ellie's going to be almost the hero. She's been on this revenge, and then she gets to the point where she actually helps Abby, and they're like, all right, let's go. And so, I mean, I guess we can just kind of get into the ending some, but then you get to this point where it's like, okay, are they just going to ride off? And Ellie's like, she just can't let it go. I mean, you see that obsession that she has. I mean, she had flashbacks on the farm. And so if you've played, again, you know what we're talking about. Her and Dina kind of have this new life with this baby that Dina has, but she keeps having these flashbacks of Joel getting killed. And so she can't just work past them. She's like, I can't get past this. I can't get past this. I've got to, Tommy gives her, and Tommy, I mean, he's a whole nother thing. He's basically invincible, which is amazing. You think he dies like 4 times throughout the game, but he gives her this news. And so you get to the end of this game and you think it's all right. Ellie's just going to let them go their way and you're going to go your way. And your redemption was letting them go. And you get that, but not in the way that you thought that you were going to get it. You thought it was going to be when she let him down, but she has to have that last fight. And so when you talk about, what was good versus evil, I mean, yeah, in some ways it was all, like you said, Matt, like Abby starts off with that by seeking revenge, but you see that revenge with both, and they both have it obsessively at different points. Abby has it with obsessing, I've got to get revenge for my dad. I've got to get vengeance for all these people in her crew. And then she realizes, like I said earlier, oh, that was empty. But Ellie still, once Joel's killed, she can't learn from Abby. She refuses to learn and see, like, again, she wouldn't really know. We get that picture because we play as Abby, but Ellie wouldn't know in some ways the regret and the emptiness that Abby is feeling. So she's now it flips to her side. She's obsessing about vengeance, and she's got to get it. And as a result, they both lose basically everything. The only person who's kind of left with Abby is Lev. And when you play with Ellie, you go back to the farm and Dina's gone and the baby's gone, and you don't really know the next part of that story. And so, yeah. What did you think about the ending, Matt? Like, with how they ended with basically you never get the revenge that you thought you were playing for the whole game.
Yeah.
For Ellie.
I mean, of course, the whole game is very bleak, right? It's very bleak and very depressing even. So, you kind of know going into it, or at least over the course of playing it, that things are not going to end well, right? That it's most likely not going to be a happy ending where everyone just kind of rides off into the sunset and forgets anything happened and that kind of thing. But at the same time, I do think that there is a little bit of a hopeful sense at the end. And I want to explain what I mean by that, because at the very, very end, right, the very closing scene is Ellie more or less realizing she's lost everything. She leaves the guitar there in the farmhouse and walks away into an unknown future, right? Because she has no one at that point. She's just 100% alone. And like you said, Adam, her whole quest more or less has cost her everything. But there is a moment, I think, that is somewhat hopeful in the sense of whenever she, rescues more or less Abby and Lev there at the beach, and there are the two boats. And like you said, there's the opportunity for them to go their separate ways and to just be like, this is it. This is the end of it. But which, of course, Abby tries to do, but Ellie refuses to let her do so. And the way that sequence plays out, if you remember, you have the two boats there. Abby picks up Lev, carries Lev over to the boat, and they're about to leave. And while they are about to leave, and Ellie is getting her boat ready, right? Because there's the two boats there. Ellie sort of like has this flashback and thinks back to a memory of Joel. Mm-hmm. And I think it's when he's playing the guitar, right? If I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, I can't remember.
But she has it's a positive memory of Joel, right? And she has that positive memory of Joel, and it's like something snaps or something triggers at that point in her mind. And she goes over to Abby and she says, I can't let you go. And it's like, no, we have to finish this right here, right now. And Abby once again tries to put an end to it by saying, no, I'm not going to fight you. And then, of course, Ellie threatens to kill Lev and says, yes, you are going to fight me. And then, they have their final fight there at the end. And so it's over the course of that sequence, and Ellie and Abby having, an absolutely brutal fight there in the water. And if you remember, Ellie is holding down Abby underwater. She's about to drown her. And, Abby is struggling and trying to get back out of the water to draw breath and everything. And it's clear in Ellie's mind. I mean, she knows at that point that she's won, right? That she's about to kill Abby, and that's about to be the end of it. But instead of that being satisfying for her, instead of that being like, okay, this is it, this is the finality, this is the resolution that I'm seeking, while she's holding Abby down underwater, she has a flashback to basically what was her final memory of Joel the night before he was killed by Abby, which is whenever they had that conversation about Joel telling Ellie that he would have done the whole thing all over again and would have saved her. And Ellie's like, I don't know if I can forgive you for that, but I would like to try to forgive you for doing that. And Joel's like, I would appreciate that, or I would like that. And so in Ellie's mind, it was like, this was the point of, this is really essentially what Abby robbed her of, or what Abby took from her in killing Joel, was she took away Ellie's ability to restore that relationship with Joel and forgive him. And so instead, there in that final moment, whenever she's holding Abby down underwater, that's the point at which I think something triggers in her mind, and realizing the futility of her actions and the fact that she actually needs to forgive in this instance. And rather than her being able to forgive Joel, which she really can't do now because Joel has died, she has the opportunity to more or less forgive Abby and to just let her go at that point. And so that's what happens, right? She has that memory of Joel and that conversation that she had with him there on the porch. And it triggers at that point in her mind that this is futile and I need to let this go. I need to forgive, more or less. And so she lets Abby out of the water. And of course, Abby is gasping for breath and everything. And then she gets in the boat with Lev and they leave, just leaving, Ellie there alone in the water. And so that to me seemed to be the only more or less hopeful moment in the story. And I'm glad that was there, because really I think the path that Ellie was going down in terms of the cycle of violence and what it was taking out of her and what she was losing over the course of the whole game, having that singular obsessive focus on hunting down Abby and killing her, Ellie was more or less killing herself at the same time. And by that, I mean like killing whatever last bit of actual humanity was left inside her. Had she killed Abby, I think that would have been like the point of no return. And Ellie would have officially killed her own humanity. And so with that little shred of humanity that's left there, I think letting Abby go is kind of like a saving of herself in that sense. I don't mean salvific, like in a Christ-like sense, but a saving of herself in terms of saving what little of humanity was left of her in a world like that. And after all the actions that she had taken that led up to that point.
Yeah. And I'll just add to this real quick, Logan, throw it back to you. I think, and that's what allows the game in some ways, so you leave that fight, and she goes back to the farm, and it's just her stuff. Dina's left, but you still have, to some degree, it's not a feeling of just total despair. It's like you said, there's some level of, I mean, it's minuscule in many ways, but there's some level of hope, of redemption, of, okay, she's not completely gone. Like, she still was, again, she had the ability to get the revenge that she wanted, that she had been obsessing about for so long, but yet she in many ways said no and gave that up. And there's a level of hope, and they don't tell you, we don't have any indication that there's going to be another Last of Us. I mean, they may do some offshoot story of another storyline, but I doubt we get any more with Ellie. And so you don't really know, okay, where does she go? Does she just wander off to some other random town, or does she go seek out Dina to continue that relationship or whatever? They really give you some almost optimism by saying, wow. Like, there was a part of me that, again, it was another one of those moments of, I can't believe they're doing this. I couldn't believe they had me playing as Abby. And at the end, there was a level where I couldn't believe they didn't have someone die at the end. But after I took some time to, I kind of was in a haze for a couple of days, just kind of thinking about it, listening to podcasts, hearing what a lot of people had to say. And I mean, I get it after the fact, but when you're in the moment, you almost can't believe it. But I think I probably would feel totally different about the game if they did have someone die at the end. So I'm really glad they didn't, because it almost allows, if they just end it with death, then it's despair. But by giving life and not taking life in some ways, there's hope at the end, which I thought was really interesting.
Just I'm sitting here listening to you guys kind of break the game down, and especially the ending, which like I said before, I've spoiled pretty much the entire game for myself. So I was like aware of kind of like how it ends, the stuff leading up to it. But I keep going back to this verse in Matthew 16:26 that says, for what will it profit a man to gain the whole world yet lose their soul in their process? And I'm thinking of, Ellie and Abby, and how their quest to, their quest for justice, so to speak, or I guess what their view of justice is. And in the process, their pursuit of that causes them to come dangerously close to losing their souls. I mean, you see it in the beginning when Abby is just continuing to sort of revel in this brutal, torturous scene with Joel. And and it comes this moment where, like, they can't really afford to stay in the building anymore because Ellie's crew is going to come on them. And you see Abby kind of hesitate a little bit, and she's like, no, I want to keep doing this. But it just kind of begs the question, maybe not necessarily begs the question, but it alludes to, I think, what it is that what the developers were trying to say in this game about violence and how it's bad. And I think we all know this, but I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with a developer trying to portray how gruesome violence is, and letting you see that in an attempt to get you to think a little bit about, is it really worth it to go down this path? So that leads me to this question. Do you guys think, well, let's do this. We'll do two questions. What do you think the game was ultimately trying to say? What was, I guess, what was their point they were trying to get across to us, the players? And do you think that they accomplished it? They accomplished getting that message across to the gamers? Let's start with Matt.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think their overall point was the futility of the cycle of violence, and that has to end, and that someone has to put a stop to that at some point. Someone has to be the person who's willing to let that go, and that if you find yourself caught in that cycle, that essentially that person may be you, right? You may be the one who has to end that. And even if it's not necessarily a cycle of violence, for us as believers, I don't think that this is necessarily a temptation for many of us to, just go on a violent rampage and enact our vengeance on everyone who we think has wronged us or anything like that. However, there could be like a cycle of bitterness, right? Or, a cycle of some type of way in which you feel you've been wronged by someone and you want to pay them back in some respect. And, that shouldn't begin a cycle, and believers should not be part of that cycle. But, unfortunately, maybe perhaps we could find ourselves in that cycle at some point. So, I think that's the overall point of the game in terms of the futility of that cycle of violence. But at the same time, I think there's also an element in which the developers wanted to see the interplay between love and hatred, in a sense, right? So if you take the first game and think of that in terms of how far would someone go out of love for someone else, in this case, we're talking about Joel's love for Ellie as sort of, his adopted daughter, in a sense, and the lengths that he was willing to go to in order to save her and to preserve that relationship. You could argue that the motivation there was love. And I think that that's a fair argument, because, Joel is a very pragmatic guy who does what he has to do because he views the world as the way that it is, and he can't do anything about that. It's just the nature of the world forces you to have to do things that, you do what you have to do to survive, or you do what you have to do in order to pursue the end that needs to be pursued. In this case, saving Ellie. So he's motivated out of love. But then on the other end, in The Last of Us Part 2, the prime motivation is not love, right? Instead, probably the prime motivation there is hate. And so I think that they were trying to, taking those two experiences together in totality, to have you feel both as a player. What does it mean, and what does it feel like to love, in a sense that you're willing to do anything for this person? And then on the backside of that, what does it feel like to hate someone so much because of what they've done to you or what they've taken from you, that you're willing to do whatever it takes in order to enact your vengeance against that person? And so to me, in a way, I consider video games a lot of times to be sort of a playground, if you will. And I don't use that term in a childish sense, but I use that in a term in a way to describe like an area where it's okay, or an area where it's not actually real and not actually happening, to kind of work through some of those thoughts and to work through some of those feelings and to work through some of those emotions and how you might react in certain scenarios that you don't really get the chance to do, say, in real life, because of course, in real life, the stakes are very real, right? And there are no takebacks as there were, say, like in a game. And so I think that from the developer's perspective, both The Last of Us and The Last of Us Part 2 kind of constitute that space in where they can draw you in as a player and try to have you deal with and sort of wrestle with a lot of these conflicting emotions there that it would not necessarily be healthy to do so in a real life scenario, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you hit a lot of it there on the head. The thing that I keep coming back to, and I mentioned it, I think earlier, is, and I don't know the right word to maybe, this kind of sounds like a silly way, but the idea of cause and effect, or the interplay of relationships, what we do so often think just affects us, but and even maybe even us and one other person, but how our choices affect so many others, even in a world where there's so much disconnection. This is a post-apocalyptic, you've got zombies everywhere. You kind of think, oh, how does my actions affect anyone? There's barely anybody around that's normal anymore. But it even shows that in such a dire environment, how we act, the choices we make, it's not just going to affect me. It's going to affect those around me. And I think we see that through the way that they tell the story. I think Matt talked about it earlier. If we take part 1 and part 2 together and not as separate stories, you really get that grand picture of, okay, I view some things differently when I'm reminded of what happens, or when I see what happens on the back end that makes me view the front end very differently. And we get that as the gamer, as the one getting to see all that. And you almost wonder, and I think maybe Abby sees more of that with her realizations, and maybe we get some of that from Ellie towards the end. But that's kind of the thought that I keep coming to, is that theme of just the way our choices, our actions affect others. And again, a lot of that's played out with, how we love others, how we can be caused to hate others because of different things, because of how those actions are played out. But Matt really hit on the head, but that's one of those things that keeps coming back to me as I think about the game. Is I thought about a lot of characters differently by the end of the second game than I did at the end of the first one. That's because I got the full picture of how the choices that they all made affected each other. And so the way that they could do that in a video game is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I think you're right, Adam, and not to steal your final word here or anything about this and about the ending, but I think you're exactly right to point out that in terms of actions having consequences, and us, our natural human tendency is to think strictly in terms of ourselves. I mean, all of us know that our natural tendency, when left unchecked, is towards selfishness, right? Mm-hmm. And so in the sense of the fact that Joel killed Abby's dad, to him, that was more or less inconsequential, like a means to an end there. He had no idea who her dad was. He had no idea who she was. He was just basically the doctor who was standing in his way, and the doctor who was going to refuse to let him take Ellie off the operating table, and was actually, willing to try to defend Ellie to try to keep Joel from taking her off the operating table. So Joel, bursts into the room, sees the doctor as a threat, and eliminates the threat, and then gets Ellie and leaves. And that's the sequence of events in his mind. He's not even actually considering anything at all other than I've got to get to Ellie, I've got to get her off that operating table, and we've got to get out of this hospital, and whoever stands in my way is going to die, basically. And so you're exactly right in terms of, that I think is illustrative of our tendency as human beings. Obviously we haven't been in a situation like that, and something that would be so high stakes as it were. But at the same time, how many times do I go throughout my day thinking about doing something, or actually even doing something with not even necessarily considering the consequences of that action or how it might be impacting others, because I'm so focused on myself. And, I think you're right to draw that out there, especially there with the end.
Yeah, that's good. I think there's definitely a lot of things to consider when playing this game, and it forces you to really ask those questions that we may not ask ourselves very often. And so I think in that regard, it accomplishes that goal. Now, as we kind of come to a close on this episode here, we kind of always round it out at the end. But is this a game that you guys would recommend? And I'm not saying it like to recommend very flippantly. I'm sure there's probably a couple caveats, but when it comes to this game and someone comes up to you and says like, "Hey Matt," or "Hey Adam, Last of Us Part 2, should I play it?" What would you guys say? Matt, let's start with you.
Honestly, I would get a little bit more information from them before making a recommendation. So, I'd want to know if they played the first game. I would want to know if they had read anything about the second game, because, there was a lot of controversy surrounding it, which I'm sure you are both aware of, in terms of the fact that, the game, of course, features a lesbian relationship, as well as includes a transgender character in it as well. And so, for some believers, that perhaps is a deal breaker, right? They can't go down that road. And to be clear, from my perspective, in terms of how I felt with playing the game, I don't at all affirm, lesbian relationships or transgender identities, both of which are the result of disordered desires as a result of the fall. So, to be clear, don't hear me talking about the game and discussing it and saying positive things about the game as me being like wholesale accepting the game and everything that's in there and all the messaging that's attached to, some of these hot button issues. That's not the case at all. So all that to say, there's so much that's there, and both in terms of the content in respect to what I just described, as well as the violent content, as well as how bleak the story is and how, depressing it is. And I would just need more information about the person, I think, and maybe have a lengthier conversation with them before maybe recommending it or not recommending it to them, on the basis of all those different aspects that are kind of playing into that.
Yep. No, I think that's exactly right. If you've answered a lot of those questions, I've played the first one. I'm familiar with some of the story beats and some of the choices that they made in regards to, again, the transgender storyline, the lesbian relationship, some of those things. And I don't want to say you just gloss over them, but you understand that, and that's not a hiccup for you per se, conscience wise. I think understanding all the things, I think I could recommend the game, but I wouldn't do that just flippantly. So I think a lot of what Matt said, you have to have that conversation. But if they understood all the aspects of it, it is a game that I could and I have recommended. It's just not one that I would recommend to definitely any and everyone. There's a lot more that goes into that.
Yeah. And, if you guys have listened this far, you guys know that I got 8 hours in and stopped playing the game. So I would just say wait for Bug Snacks on the PS5. That's my poor attempt at humor there. But this is probably going to sound bad to a degree. So yeah, I won't even say that. But I think Matt and Adam both are kind of hitting it on the head here. Kind of like, you got to answer these questions first, because it's not a game that is easy to recommend for a variety of reasons. I think honestly, one of the reasons why I stopped playing it was just because there are moments. It's funny because people told me, this game is incessantly bleak. It's always depressing. But there's moments of joy and there's moments of hope. That museum scene with Joel and Ellie was incredible. I loved that scene. It was just, I don't know, it was a breath of fresh air, and I think they used that timing effectively in placing that in when it comes up in the story. But so there's things to enjoy in the game, but at the same time, it's it's not a very easy recommend for a variety of reasons. And so that being said, dear listeners, if you are at this point and you've played the game, let us know what you think about the game, whether it's on Discord, Facebook, Twitter, MySpace, I don't know, wherever you are, whenever you are. Let us know your thoughts on the game. And if there's a particular thing that you saw while playing the game that you thought was worthy of discussion, let's get into it. But this is our second episode of the month, and so this is our patron thank you episode. This is a moment where we take a second to thank our dear patrons who support us over on patreon.com/thereformedgamers. These are the folks who support us at $1 or above and help keep the controllers charged, keep the fridge stocked with Red Bulls or whatever it is that helps us get through platinum trophies. And we're just humbled and grateful for your support. So we're going to go ahead and read through a couple of those. Adam, hopefully I made the text dark enough for you. Okay, cool. Because I know last time I didn't do you any favors by making it neon green. But anyway, so those folks are Alex Castellanos, Andre Swan, Andrew Steedman, Ashley Cronenbitter, Caleb Schmidt, Christopher Commander,
Colin Gregory, David B., David Matthews, Derek Smith, Feelin' Film, Jake Walker, James Barker,
Josh Broccolo, Kokoro Daki, Mark Fromy, Matthew White Chocolate McDougal, Melvin Benson V, Micah Hendrick, Michael Toller,
Nate McKeever, the Retro Rewind Podcast, Sam White, Sam Kalunga, Third Strongest Mole, it's a great one, Weatherman Keefe, and Wesley Ray.
This makes me wonder what's the story with the
I want to know
first
the first two
and second.
strongest. Yeah, the first two ones.
What happened there? Anyway, guys, thank you so much for your support over on patreon.com. We are very grateful for your continued support and helping us to really keep the show going. We greatly appreciate that as always. But before we let you go, some recos, some things for you to check out. Matt, what is something that our dear listeners should check out?
Well, so I recently purchased the Lego Nintendo Entertainment System. So you may have seen that online, maybe from Nintendo's Twitter account or the Lego Twitter account, or maybe some stories on some of the gaming blogs. But so it's basically an NES made entirely out of Legos, along with a vintage, sort of retro TV set to go along with that. I will say it's extremely pricey though, in terms of which Lego sets. I mean, of course, Lego sets are pricey. So if you know very much about Lego, you know that you're going to be shelling out for them. But yeah, it was definitely a hit to the wallet. But I've started building it. It's going to be a pretty lengthy build for me because I only have a limited amount of time to work on it each evening and everything. But I've enjoyed it so far, and I'm looking forward to completing that. I think it's really cool, the design that they implemented for that, in terms of taking the NES and translating that into Lego form is just really well done and ingenious, even as a lot of things that Lego does are actually is. And so I highly recommend that if that's something that you're interested in, as well as if it's something that you have the available cash for. Don't like take out a loan or anything, or go into severe debt to actually pursue that, because again, it is a little bit on the pricey side. But otherwise, I think it's really cool.
Well, Matt, I wish you had given that warning earlier, because it's too late. I have already taken out a second loan. And no, I'm kidding.
If you know anything about Matt, if you follow him on Twitter, he's got all kinds of investing advice for you also.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah, that's kind of my thing too, is the investing and personal finance side. So
I try to follow you, man, and I'm like, I try to track, but I'm like, it's like those GIFs that you see of the lady thinking, and there's all these symbols all around her. I'm like, I'm trying to track here, but
no, I get that a lot, and I also get the Michael Scott explain it to me like I'm 5. Yes, a lot too.
Seriously, no doubt.
That's funny. Good. Adam, what about you, man?
Yeah, I mean, this just came to me going off of that conversation about Legos. There was a TV series. It was like basically like the Great American Cooking Show and all these cooking challenges, but with Legos. I think it was on Fox. We watched it on Hulu. Hannah got really into it out of nowhere, but it's basically a Lego building competition where they have like 10, 12 hours to build these crazy designs. Matt, if you haven't seen that, it's worth checking out. I mean, it's some impressive Lego building all from scratch.
I'll have to check that out.
So that's a little side one, but yeah, my big one I said earlier, Fall Guys. Check it out. As soon as we hang up here, I'm going to go jump in a game or two before I go to bed. It's a lot of good fun. So if you guys want to play, holla at your boy, PSN.
Right on. Well, dear listeners, it took 174 episodes, but I think I don't have a reco for this episode. I mean, if I guess if I were to give one reco, I'm as I'm getting older, I'm getting to a point where I'm like, I need to stop taking things so seriously. You know, you got people upset because Spider-Man isn't in the Xbox version of Avengers. You got people mad at PlayStation because I guess allowing them to use DualShock 4s on the PS5 is a bad thing, apparently. But I just, there's some things that you just don't need to worry about. So I guess in a roundabout way, I do have a reco, and it's, don't take things so seriously. Yeah, just chill out. and not even with Sony related things specifically. Just
you Sony pony.
Yeah, I am a Sony pony, man. 20 platinums in 2020. Let's go. But just enjoy life. There's things we don't need to worry about. I'm going to be honest, man. And I don't know why this is affecting me as much as it is. Here I am saying I don't have a reco, and then here I am with my flip flops on having a reco. Like I saw that video from Beirut, that explosion that went off, and I'm just like,
crazy,
dude. Stuff like that can happen in an instant, man. I don't know if it's worth it for me to sit here and stew about things that I can't change or aren't really worth my time. You know, stuff like that can happen in an instant. I think there's better things that I can spend my time thinking about and worrying about. And so I think if I were to give one reco, it would be to just focus on the things that matter and the things that you can actually change. And as for whether or not you can play a Spider-Man on Xbox, just who cares? Just focus on the more important things in life, which ironically enough is kind of on point with the game we just talked about in a weird way. Anyway, dear listeners, thank you for listening to this episode. Again, if you want to support us financially, you can do so on Patreon. Links and all that stuff will be in your show notes. You don't have to, but if you'd like to, you're more than welcome to do that there. Follow me on Twitch. I stream every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Going to be working through the Batman Arkham series. Again, if you would like to have a chance at winning all of the Batman Arkham games on Steam, drop by and get more information that way. As always, check out the website, thereformedgamers.com. I tell you what, between Micah, Wesley, and Tyler, they're cranking out some great content for the website. The website is the best it has ever been. So definitely check out their work. Support them over there. They do some great stuff. I'm really, really proud of those guys and what they do over there. As always, you can follow us on Twitter at TRG Podcast. You can like our Facebook page. You can join the Facebook group. You can join our Discord server. There's a lot of ways you can interact with us. So links for those will be in your show notes, and you can check those out at your leisure. Matt, thank you again for coming on the show and helping us break down this very controversial but very worthy game of discussing in regards of its themes and kind of what it's trying to say. Man, appreciate your insights.
Yeah, happy to be here, and thanks again for the invitation. Enjoyed it.
Yeah, man. As always, you are always welcome on the Reformed Gamers. But dear listeners, until next time, be a deer, keep it locked here, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Reformed Gamers, the podcast all about theology and gaming. TRG is edited by Dear Ear Productions, so thank them for the buttery smooth tones in your ear. If you're looking for extra content, head on over to youtube.com/thereformedgamers. The Reformed Gamers is entirely fan-supported over on patreon.com/thereformedgamers by our dear patrons. The following deer are at the producer level or higher and will forever be thanked at the end of each show, as long as their pledge comes through, or we forget to update the audio. Those people are David Matthews, Colin Gregory, and Wesley Ray. Thank you for your support on patreon.com, keeping our controllers charged, and supporting Logan in his never-ending quest to collect them all. Platinum trophies, that is. So be a deer and keep it locked here. Keep listening. We'll catch you later.